So the next area of the world where we're going to shift our focus to is Africa. All right, we're looking at the African continent. To begin with, we're going to look at what we might consider to be more interior or southern Africa during this time frame. Now, the civilizations of this particular region are mainly located, or the states we might say, are located between these two rivers, Limpopo and the Zambezi River. Most original inhabitants of the interior of southern Africa were Bantu-speaking peoples who cultivated the land with iron tools. By the year 1000, some were wealthy enough to construct stone enclosures for themselves, and they benefited from rich sources of gold that were in demand on the Swahili coast, which is to say the east coast. This gold was either mined directly in or passed through these lands on their way to the coast. Now, Great Zimbabwe, the most central of these states, is the one we'll focus on. The growth of Great Zimbabwe is connected to growing trade on the coast, and their wealth was concentrated in growing herds of cattle. All right? Stone House, Zimbabwe. That's the translation in the Bantu languages. So we again see iron tools, they facilitate trade, and their wealth is in their gold, so they serve as middlemen, and their cattle. Now the resources and labor required to build the protective walls of the great enclosure, and they built them out of stone without any mortar. This is pretty considerable. The best estimate is that 400 craftsmen could have constructed the enclosure during the off-agricultural season over a period of 4 years. And these walls, which you get an interior and an exterior look at it, we're talking 16 feet thick, 32 feet tall. Now, no written records exist for Great Zimbabwe, but excavations tell us that there wasn't any Islamic influence at its peak, and there are remains of Chinese ceramic pots and Persian earthenware plates. So they did have knowledge of the outside world. Now, ultimately, we have no idea what led to their decline in the 15th century. But realistically, it's probably a classic case of too many people and not enough resources. At its peak, there were about 18,000 people on 193 acres, and the cattle overgrazed the land. Also, the surrounding forests were stripped of too much timber for firewood, and by the time the Portuguese showed up in 1498, they had already declined. So Great Zimbabwe is the first African state we're looking at. Now, the additional states that we are going to address, one is the Kingdom of Aksum, or Ethiopia. Now, the rulers of Aksum converted to Christianity shortly after the Roman ruler Constantine the Great issued the Edict of Milan. So we're going all the way back to the 300s. They taxed trade from Egypt that went to India via the Red Sea. All right, they took advantage of the Red Sea and their location for trade. And merchants encountered Christians on trading voyages to the Mediterranean. Now, later inscriptions indicate the support of Christianity that the rulers emphasized. The first bishop of Aksum and all of his successors received their appointments from Egyptian bishops. And for centuries, Ethiopia successfully resisted the advancement of Islam. And the dynasty that ruled after the year 1270 claimed descent from King Solomon of Israel. Now, this particular dynasty, within our time frame, increased trade through the Red Sea. They would trade goods like amber, animal pelts, and slaves. But their expansion and efforts to increase control over trade in the late 1400s, all right, so their efforts to increase control over trade a little bit beyond our time frame did put them in the crosshairs of Muslims who controlled coastal states on the Red Sea. So we have the Kingdom of Aksum. The Hausa Kingdoms, we can see the Hausa city-states. Now, the Hausa Kingdoms are mostly autonomous. aside from briefly being a part of what's called the Songhai Empire. They're located in central Sudan, or what's now the central Sudan, and they attracted the caravans that brought textiles, hardware, and weapons across the Sahara. So they did benefit from the collapse of the mighty Mali Empire, and they did adopt Islam. Now, the flow of goods through the Hausa Kingdoms was similar to that of the coastal traders, with the exception of not allowing alcohol, which was prohibited by their Islamic faith. So no matter where we're talking about, in Africa, Great Zimbabwe, Aksum, the Hausa Kingdoms, wealth through facilitating trade is a common element that emerges.